Story 1. The Watcher in the Hills. I served in Afghanistan for 2 tours, mostly stationed at remote outposts in the mountains. Our unit was small, just a handful of us, tasked with patrolling some of the more isolated regions near the border. We were used to rough conditions, but there was one stretch of mountainside that always felt different, unsettling. It wasn't the usual dangers, the Taliban landmines, ambushes. No, it was something else, something that the locals refused to talk about. Anytime we mentioned those mountains, their faces would go pale. They'd shake their heads and mutter something about the watchers in the hills, but never more than that. We didn't pay it much attention at first. Local superstitions, we figured. But after a while, it became hard to ignore. We were sent out on a recon mission late one afternoon. A simple patrol, nothing out of the ordinary. The sun was setting behind the mountains, casting long shadows over the jagged terrain. Our radios crackled with static, something that had become common up there. The terrain was rough, and signals got scrambled easily. That evening, as we set up camp, one of the guys, Jackson, pointed to the ridge above us. "Anyone else see that?" I looked up, squinting. At first, I didn't see anything, but then there was a figure, standing perfectly still on the ridge, silhouetted against the fading light. Too far away to make out any details, but something about the way it stood, completely motionless, set me on edge. "Could be a goat herder," one of the guys said, though he didn't sound convinced. "Could be," I muttered, but I kept my eyes on it. We'd seen plenty of locals moving through the hills, but this was different. The figure never moved, not even an inch, just stood there, watching us. That night, as we huddled around the fire, the air grew colder than usual. The wind howled through the rocks, and every now and then, we'd hear strange sounds, echoes from the mountains, like whispering voices carried on the wind. We wrote it off as nothing more than the eerie quiet of the hills playing tricks on us. But then, around midnight, we heard footsteps. At first, it was faint, like someone walking on gravel. We all froze, listening. Then, the sound grew louder, circling around us. There was no light, no movement that we could see, but we could hear it, something walking around our camp, deliberately staying just beyond the reach of our flashlights. Jackson swore he saw something moving in the shadows, tall, lanky, just at the edge of the firelight. We searched the perimeter, weapons ready, but found nothing. Just the empty, barren hillside and the cold wind. Whatever it was toying with us. The next day, we continued our patrol, pushing further up into the mountains. But the feeling of being watched never left. Every time I glanced up at the ridges, I'd see something, just for a second. A figure, tall and gaunt, standing in the distance, always just beyond reach. And every time I'd blink, it was gone. We started hearing whispers, too, faint voices carried on the wind, saying things we couldn't quite understand. At night, the footsteps returned, closer this time, like they were circling us tighter and tighter. By the third day, we were all on edge. None of us were sleeping. Jackson, who'd been the first to see the figure, was starting to lose it. He kept muttering about the watchers and how they were getting closer. He swore he saw one of them standing right next to his cot during the night, watching him while he slept. Then, on the 4th night, Jackson disappeared. We woke up in the early morning to find his cot empty, his gear still in place. At first, we thought he might have wandered off to take a piss, but after an hour of searching, there was no sign of him. No tracks, no trail, nothing. It was like he had just vanished into thin air. We searched for hours, calling his name, but the only response we got was the wind echoing through the mountains. It was then that we realized we were being hunted. That night, we didn't set up camp. We couldn't stay still, not after what had happened to Jackson. We moved quietly, making our way down the mountainside, keeping our weapons close, scanning every ridge and rock for signs of movement. But it didn't matter. We knew they were out there, watching. The whispers followed us all the way down, soft, like someone murmuring just behind you, close enough to touch, but never there when you turned around. And the footsteps, they were right behind us, always just beyond the light of our flashlights. By the time we reached base, we were exhausted. No one spoke about what happened to Jackson. No one wanted to admit what we all knew, that whatever was up there in those hills had taken him. And whatever it wasn't human. After we got back, we filed a report. Said Jackson went missing during a patrol. That's all. No mention of the figures, the whispers, the footsteps. Command wouldn't have believed us anyway. Hell, I barely believed it myself. But I know what I saw. A few weeks later, I heard a story from one of the locals, an old man who had lived in the region his whole life. He told me that those mountains were cursed, that they were the domain of the Watchers, ancient spirits that guard the land. He said anyone who wandered too deep into their territory wouldn't come back. I never went back to those mountains, but I still think about Jackson. Sometimes in my dreams, I see him standing on that ridge, watching us with the same cold, empty stare. And I know wherever he is now, he's still up there, watching, waiting. Story 2. It happened last year, right around this time. I had just moved into a small, cozy bungalow on the outskirts of town. It was one of those older homes, charming with its creaky floors and narrow hallways, but I loved it. The neighborhood was quiet, with woods just beyond my backyard. It felt like a peaceful escape from the noise of the city, and I couldn't wait to settle in. The first few weeks went by uneventfully, but then little things started to feel off. At first, I chalked it up to the new place, things just shifting around. You know, like how a house settles? I'd come home from work and find the front door unlocked, or windows slightly ajar when I knew I had closed them. I brushed it off. Maybe I'm just getting forgetful, I'd think to myself, trying to ease the pit of dread forming in my stomach. But one night, about a month in, something happened that I can't explain. I had gone to bed early, exhausted from a long day at work. The woods outside my bedroom window were alive with the usual sounds, crickets, the occasional owl hooting in the distance. I was drifting off to sleep when I heard a distinct, soft tapping sound coming from somewhere in the house. Tap, tap, tap. I sat up, my heart racing. I told myself it was nothing, a branch against the window maybe, but the tapping continued. Tap, tap. It was rhythmic, deliberate. I grabbed my phone and crept out of bed, inching toward the hallway. My whole body was tense, like a coiled spring. The sound was coming from the living room. My heart was pounding in my ears as I flicked on the hallway light, expecting, well, I don't even know what. But the tapping stopped. Everything was quiet again. Too quiet. I stood there, frozen, listening to the heavy silence, when suddenly, I felt it, this overwhelming sense that I wasn't alone, that someone was watching me. I don't know how to explain it, but the air felt thicker, oppressive. I walked toward the front door and saw it was unlocked. My blood ran cold. I had locked it. I knew I had. I bolted the door and spent the rest of the night sitting on my couch, gripping a kitchen knife, waiting for something. But nothing happened. Not that night, anyway. The next day, I installed security cameras. I thought I was being paranoid, but I needed peace of mind. And that's when I caught him. A few nights later, I was reviewing the footage, and there he was, a man, tall and thin, creeping around the side of the house, just outside the frame of my bedroom window. He was watching me sleep. I called the police, of course, but they didn't find much. Just some muddy footprints by the window. They said it was probably just a vagrant passing through. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than that. That this person knew my schedule, my habits. They knew when I was home, when I wasn't. I started noticing more strange things after that. Items would go missing, a pair of shoes, a jacket. Sometimes I'd come home and it felt like someone had been there. The police weren't much help, and honestly, I think they thought I was imagining things. But I wasn't. The breaking point came one night when I woke up to the sound of breathing. Not mine, someone else's close. Too close. My eyes shot open, and in the dark, I saw a figure standing at the foot of my bed. Tall, looming, watching me. I screamed, fumbling for the lamp on my nightstand, but by the time I turned it on, the figure was gone. The door to my bedroom was wide open, swinging slightly as if someone had just slipped through. My heart was hammering in my chest as I ran to the front door. It was unlocked. Again. That night, I packed a bag and left. I couldn't stay there anymore. I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever it was, they were waiting for the right moment. Watching. Always watching. I never went back. I sold the house a few weeks later, took a loss, but it didn't matter. I just needed to get out. Sometimes, though, I still wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I can feel someone standing there, just beyond the edge of my vision. Watching. That unsettling sensation of being watched, the violation of personal space, the fear that someone could slip into your life unnoticed. It's enough to make anyone check their locks a second time. Story 3. The house that breathed. When I first moved into that house, it seemed perfect. A charming old farmhouse at the edge of town, the kind of place that felt like it had stories in its walls. I didn't mind that it was a little run down. In fact, it felt like a project, a way to make it mine. But from the moment I stepped inside, I knew something was off. It wasn't anything obvious at first. Just a feeling, like the air was heavier somehow, like the house was watching me. I shrugged it off as nerves. It was an old house. Old houses creak, settle, make noises. But the feeling didn't go away. If anything, it got worse. The first night, as I lay in bed, I heard a noise from the hallway. A slow, deep groan, like the wood was stretching and straining against itself. I told myself it was the floorboards or the wind, but it wasn't windy, and the sound, it felt too deliberate, too alive. Over the next few days, I noticed more things. Doors that I swore I'd close would be wide open when I came back into the room. Cabinets would swing open slowly, just enough to catch my attention. And at night, the groaning sound from the hallway got louder, almost like the house was breathing, long, drawn-out inhales and exhales, echoing through the walls. One evening, I decided to check the basement. I'd been putting it off. There's something about dark, damp cellars in old houses that unsettles me. But curiosity got the better of me. As I pulled open the basement door, a cold draft blew up the stairs, carrying with it a damp, earthy smell that made my skin crawl. The stairs creaked as I descended, the air getting colder with each step. My flashlight flickered in the dark, casting long, twisting shadows along the stone walls. The basement was empty, except for some old furniture and a pile of rotting wood in the corner. But something about the space felt wrong, like it was waiting for something, or someone. As I turned to head back up, I noticed a dark patch on the far wall, almost like a stain. I shined my flashlight on it and froze. It wasn't a stain, it was a handprint, large, smeared, and damp, like someone had pressed their hand against the stone with enormous force. I felt a chill run down my spine. There was no one else in the house. There couldn't be. I hadn't seen anyone. But the handprint was fresh, the outline still glistening in the dim light. I ran up the stairs and slammed the basement door behind me, heart pounding in my chest. From that night on, the house changed. The walls seemed to shift, groaning louder than before. The doors would open by themselves, no matter how many times I locked them. I started hearing whispers at night, low, indistinct murmurs that echoed through the walls, like someone was talking just out of earshot. And then the dreams started. Every night, I'd dream of the basement. I'd see the stairs stretching down, deeper and deeper into the earth, far beyond what they should have. At the bottom, there was always a door, an old, rotting door that pulsed like something was breathing behind it. And each night, the door was a little closer to opening. One night, I woke up to find myself standing at the top of the basement stairs, my hand resting on the doorknob. I don't know how I got there, or why I had been sleepwalking, but the moment I touched that door, a jolt of icy terror shot through me. I yanked my hand back and ran to my bedroom, slamming the door shut. That's when I noticed the marks. On the walls of my bedroom, thin, black streaks had appeared overnight. Long, twisting lines like something had crawled its way up from the floor and was trying to reach the ceiling. They weren't there before. I was sure of it. But now, they covered every wall, and the air was thick, heavy. Every breath felt like I was inhaling the house itself, like the walls were closing in on me. I called a contractor to check for mold, leaks, anything that could explain what was happening. He came, poked around, and told me everything looked fine. But as he was leaving, he stopped in the hallway, his face pale. "Has anyone else lived here recently?" he asked, his voice uneasy. "No," I said. "Not for years." He didn't say anything after that, just shook his head and left. But later, I found out why he was so shaken. The house had a history. The last family that lived there disappeared. No one knew what happened to them. One night, they were there, and the next, they were gone, vanished without a trace. All their belongings were left behind, and the house had sat empty for years after that, unsold, untouched. Until me. I tried to convince myself it was just a story, an urban legend. But the house didn't let me forget. The last night I spent there was the worst. I woke up in the middle of the night to a deafening crash. I jumped out of bed and ran to the hallway. The basement door was wide open, the old wooden stairs groaning, as though something heavy was moving up from below. I couldn't see it, but I could hear it, slow, deliberate footsteps, dragging something with each step. I backed away, my heart racing, and as I turned to run, I saw the walls. They were covered in handprints, dozens of them, all black and smeared, crawling up from the floor to the ceiling, overlapping and twisting into shapes I didn't want to understand. The whispers were louder now, almost like a chant, a low, guttural voice that echoed through the house, surrounding me. I ran. I didn't stop until I was out the door and in my car, speeding away down the dark country road. I never went back. I left everything, my furniture, my clothes, everything. I couldn't bear to set foot in that place again. But sometimes, when I'm lying in bed late at night, I still hear it, the faint sound of breathing, long, slow, and deliberate, as though the house is still out there somewhere, waiting. As we wrap up tonight's chilling tales, remember that not all darkness is just the absence of light, and sometimes, the most unsettling stories are those rooted in our deepest fears. From haunted houses to eerie disappearances, these stories remind us that the unknown can be far more terrifying than we ever imagined. If these stories left you with chills, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more spine-tingling content. And if you have your own terrifying tales or paranormal experiences, drop them in the comments below. Until next time, stay vigilant. There's no telling what might be lurking just out of sight.